Welcome into the third edition of our new offseason series here on the Built in Buffalo Network. This is Kevin Syracuse alongside Pat Bruckness, and we will be joined shortly by Kevin Messeri as we're going to put our final wish list together. So if you've been following along, a couple of weeks ago, we put the top 5 moves together that the Bills need to make this offseason. Then last week, we took an in-depth look at the salary caps, and we went on over the cap and brought up the calculator to show how the Bills can save over $50 million, if not more. So just to recap what we did. So we are under the impression, we have a general consensus between the three of us, that the Bills will extend Josh Allen to not only give him more money, because let's not forget, he's only the 14th highest paid quarterback right now based on average annual value. So we feel like they're going to want to pay their MVP quarterback while also lowering his cap hit, and that would save almost $12 million. With Von Miller, we have a consensus that he will probably just have to take a pay cut. I mean, right now his cap hit is $23.8 million, and for an almost 36-year-old, that is just way too much. So, I mean, you can restructure him, but you probably don't want to kick the can down the road with Von Miller. Maybe you could designate him as a post-June 1st cut, pre-June 1st cut, but we think that it's probably most likely that he's going to take a pay cut. We mentioned last week how he wants to learn how to be a GM, and he did that last year with Brandon Beane, so maybe they can get a deal done again. And then you look at some of these restructures here, Ed Oliver, Deion Dawkins, and Curtis Samuel. So those moves together will save over $40 million. And then as we go down our list here, we also mentioned how the Bills can just outright cut Mitch Trubisky. They already have Mike White, so he can be QB2. Cutting Mitch would save $2.5 million. Trading Kyer Elam, as we will get to in a few minutes, that would save the Bills $2.6 million. If they were to outright cut him, he has too many guarantees, so they wouldn't save anything. There's just $4.4 million in dead cap. Zero savings in terms of the cap hit. And then maybe Sam Martin's another guy. You know, we talked about him with Jake Camarda on that same reserve/futures contract as Mike White. So maybe with Chris Tabor, he wants to get a fresh slate of special teamers in. Balin Spector, we mentioned him. I mean, there are so many moves that the Bills can make, Pat, where we didn't even mention Dawson Knox. Maybe they want to tinker on with his contract. Matt Milano. Just so many different moves that they can make. But when it's all said and done, as we go into this episode today, the Bills will go from $10 million over the cap to having roughly $40 million in cap space as we approach the new league year.
Yeah, there's a lot of moves to be made, like the ones you just spoke on, and even the moves that we did not mention, like you said, Dawson Knox. I can't wait to see what Brandon Beane does.
All right, well, before we bring Kevin Messeri on, just want to say thank you to our sponsors between the Summit Center, who's doing some great work with autism awareness, and thank you to Dave Dengler and the Larson Timko Funeral Home in Fredonia. Larson Timko Funeral Home offering 100% fully guaranteed price and pre-arranged funeral plans with live streaming available. You can give them a call at 716-679-9000 or visit their website at larsontimkofuneralhome.com. So, that being said, make sure you smash a like, subscribe to Built in Buffalo, subscribe to my personal channel, Kevin Syracuse, and make sure you follow me, Pat, and Kevin on Twitter as well. So that being said, let's bring Kevin on, and we can finally put our wish list together. All right, so the first player on our wish list for the 2025 offseason for the Buffalo Bills is trading for Browns defensive end Myles Garrett. We think that this is going to be one of those big moves that Brandon Beane knows that he has to make. He knows that that is the one move that is going to put this team over the top. Obviously, there are other moves that need to be made. You got to build up the defensive line in general. You have to build up the defense in general. But I think it starts with getting a dominant pass rusher. And Pat, would you be in agreement here that Myles Garrett is the big ticket item this year, assuming that they can, in fact, clear this $50 million, if not more, that we've been talking about?
Yes, I do, because if you have a chance to add, probably some people call Myles Garrett the best non-quarterback in the NFL. And we have seen it in the last several years in the playoffs that we have needed that impact player on defense, and there's no better player than Myles Garrett.
So, Kevin, what are your thoughts on this Myles Garrett talk? Because if the Bills were to acquire him before March 14th, it is going to cost $19.7 million on their cap. Now, I know that he said that he wants to get an extension, so the Bills will probably have to work something out. But assuming that he plays on this contract, or at least that's what the Bills acquire him on, it is going to be $19.7 before March 14th, because that's when he's due that $5 million roster bonus. If you trade for him after March 14th, so let's just say it's around that Stephon Diggs time where it's leading up into the draft, because I think if you're the Browns, like you want to make this deal done before the draft so that you can help your team this year and in the future. So if it's within that time frame, then it becomes 14.8 for the Bills. And then if you go all the way down to August 28th, when he has another $13 million roster bonus, you would just have to pay that $1.3 million base salary. So I guess, do you think that this is feasible in general? And if so, when do you think we could see this trade?
Well, the full $18.5 million option, both of those, you mentioned the 5 and then the 13.5, it is due to commit to him all at the same time. So you don't have to literally pay him in cash at that point. But the way that structures, basically that's just a contract restructure. So when you see something like $13.5 million on August 28th, that just means that the Browns or whatever team has the option to then kick money down the road of that 18.5. It's a restructure just built in. But you're committing to the $18.5 million option bonus, $314. Owing 5 of it, you have to pay him in cash on that day, but you're still committing in contract form to the whole amount. So he will be moved by 314. Like, that is official. I don't know to where, unless he decides he's playing for the Browns. You would commit to him to guaranteed money and with a $5 million check. That means that he will be wherever he's playing on 314. I do not believe that he will be moved after that point, just due to the way that it's written, unless the Browns receive even more compensation than most teams are going to want to pay. So I think that my biggest concern right now is that you would need to have a deal done with him by 314, because that is kind of the reason it's written like that is so a team has the chance to do a contract with him by 314. So you're going to have to come in, and I just don't think there's any way he's going to play on the minimum base salary plus the 18.5 total he's owed. He's a $35 million player, and you're half of that at this stage. So you're going to probably have to commit five years to him at 30 years old already. He's not 34. He's not 33. He's not Von Miller's age when you signed him. But he's also going to cost double the money of Von Miller, and he's also going to cost premium assets. So that money we just talked about being free in 2 years you'd be utilized in full or in a good chunk of it with Von Miller or with Myles Garrett probably taking up $45 million plus in future years, because you're not going to be able to pay him that against the cap this year, meaning he's going to be charged more down the road. So I think it's a challenge to make Myles Garrett work. Do the Bills do it because of the premier player at 30 years old? You should. But at the same time, we can't have the same conversation again where people are complaining about Von Miller at the time. So it is a fine balance. Will the Bills do it? I have to see that at what cost. I'm okay with the contract. I get a little squirrely with the contract plus the 1, 3, 4, 2, 4 in future years. So it really does depend on the full package. Myles Garrett has put himself in a corner to really where the Browns are probably going to receive less for him with the way this is going down, but we'll see how much less. But I could be open to it, but I think that you need to move back some players in the trade to mitigate the contract asset value in terms of if you are going to pay James Cook, maybe he's right in this. Dorian Williams, players like that. When I've spoken to Browns people who have mentioned that they would like a player like Dorian Williams back in the trade. So you have to think about, you got to get rid of some young talent. You got to lower some of those cap hits, because guys, you can't trade these premium pick assets. The Bills need those on the books like they had Benford, Shakir, Cook, Bernard. You need those $1 million salaries. It's not just about paying Myles Garrett. It's about the rest of your roster now. Now you can't fill in with those rookie picks. They got to be really careful with this. I would play the market. There are more defensive ends in the market than ever. That's what I think than there'll ever be. So the Bills may have an opportunity next week to decide who's the best fit over 4 or 5 premier pass rushers.
I was going to say, so what do we think a trade package would look like? Because I think you at least have to give your first round pick this year, probably the first next year. I want to use that the extra second that the Bills have from the Diggs trade. And speaking of throwing in players, I want to give them Kaiir Elam, because after 3 years, you can tell that it hasn't worked yet. We all saw the AFC Championship game, but to what I was telling Pat last week, maybe with Mike Pellegrino coming over, maybe that's a sign that they want to give Kaiir Elam one more chance. But I think if it means getting Myles Garrett, then you can save $2.6 million by getting rid of Elam, telling the Browns, hey, here's maybe a promising young corner, and take that with a grain of salt, right? But maybe given the right system, and you guys can coach him up, maybe if you play more man coverage and play more to his play style, he can be a nice piece for you guys. So I'm wondering if you can use Kaiir Elam as part of that trade package. Maybe you don't have to give up a 6, and maybe in return you can get a 7. So when it's all said and done, the Bills would get Myles Garrett and a 7th for 2 first-round picks, a 2nd, and Kaiir Elam. Do we think that would be feasible? Is that accurate?
I think they would want more personally than that, but it's fair. I don't know how interested they'd be in Elam at their stage of their restructure. They probably want someone a little bit more cost control, like I mentioned, like a Dorian Williams, what I've heard out of their camp. So something along those lines makes sense to me. I don't think they can take like a James Cook because they can't pay him. They're in a world of cap hurt, and I mean they just don't need to run. They're going to lose Chubb. They're just not a running back away from anything. So I mean ultimately they're probably going to want to hand select a guy. Maybe you could toss an Elam. But I don't ultimately think he does anything for the trade. But I do believe that Elam's traded for sure. I don't believe that he's also had multiple cornerback coaches at this stage. The Bills are switching to a different style of mesh defense in terms of man coverage and what they're looking to do. He's a man cover corner that has struggled in man coverage. So ultimately, I think his day is done. But there is probably a team out there that may seem fit to utilize that. What he's been able to do. Like a named team that comes to mind is the Jets with Aaron Glenn, but they're not. I don't believe they would trade him to the Jets. But hey, that could be a double agent type of trade, like we saw with Trey White against the Ravens in the playoffs. But ultimately, I think you're close on the trade package. I just get a little squirrely as you're now talking about 1-1-2. I mean, they got to come to a common ground, but at the same time, the Bills can't spend too many of these premium. That would leave them with no third. They'd have 1 second-round pick to add to the roster this year with obviously with Garrett, but the 1 second-round pick, then that makes that pick. You got to hit that pick. And the last time they did that situation, they took AJ Epinesa. He is still on the roster, and I thought he's been a good player for the team, fourth defensive end, but they're probably going to need to do a step better than that. There's a heightened sense around that remaining pick.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you're trying to find a player in the draft who's going to amount to Myles Garrett. And the last time the Bills had the 30th pick in the draft, it was Greg Rousseau. And Greg Rousseau, to your point, he's nice, but he's not a dominant, proven player like Myles Garrett. That's why I think if you had the chance to go do it, then do it. Now, Pat, what we talked about last week was that you don't save anything if you get rid of Kaiir Elam. There's more dead money than there is cap savings. So do you think that he could be part of that trade package? And I guess just what are your thoughts on what Kevin and I have talked about?
No, I really like the trade package that you put together, Kevin. Now, as far as Kaiir Elam, I do believe that he will be traded, either if it's to the Browns or if it's somewhere else. Now, Kevin, I do have a question for you. You did say if the Bills were to do that type of trade package that we would have to hit on that second-round pick. Could we see Brandon Beane trade back to try acquire a later second-round pick and maybe a third?
That's a good point.
I think you're too far deep into the second round. You can do that when you have like where Keon Coleman was drafted. You can then receive a third round pick by trading back, but you're already at the end of the second round. Where are you going to go? So then you could go get a third and a fourth for trading back. Now you're not picking till the third round. Like by trading those two assets, you've limited you're not trading back. Like you need to take a player at whatever second round pick they have. They need to take a player there. There's not enough value going from pick 56 to 64. You're talking about maybe a late fourth back. I mean, ultimately, they'll probably rather just keep to their board and pick whoever it is that is the best player on the board. But remember about Elam, you do save money by trading him. By trading him, you trade his guaranteed contract. You don't save money by cutting him. You save money by trading him because you trade that guaranteed rookie deal to a new team. He would free up his whole base salary. So you would free up $2.5 million by trading. I think that's one of the main reasons why you trade Kaiir Elam. And I said you'd get a 6 for him. I think maybe it's a 6 for 7 swap. But ultimately, I don't care if you get a backup special teams linebacker to come in for Chris Tabor and compete for a roster spot or a UDFA or something that you may be nice on somewhere. It's not about the package. You get rid of them. You save the roster spot. You save the 2-6. But Pat, no, I don't believe that they could trade back with the Garrett deal. Okay. Now you're not picking till the 70s, late 60s. You got to get somebody in here in the 50s. Like you can't have your first pick be in the third round or late second.
Now, switching over to defensive tackle. Now, Pat and I have talked about this over the last couple of weeks, Kevin. So what are your ideas here? Because if I'm going off the impression that the Bills are trading for Myles Garrett, and I'm also under the impression that they want to build like Philadelphia did. They want to build their line through the trenches in the draft this year. So that's where I think you can find Daquan Jones' replacement as that one tech this year, because this is very deep for defensive tackles. So putting those two together, that's why I think you don't need to go get a top-tier defensive tackle in free agency because there's just not going to be the money for it. So two players that Pat and I have discussed are Adam Butler with the Raiders, a player who's gotten better every single season. He was a spot starter this past season. He started 16 games in Christian Wilkins' absence, back-to-back seasons of 5 sacks. And then Sebastian Joseph Day, he was in on a visit last season, and I think the Bills have had interest in him before in multiple seasons, whether it was free agency or the trade deadline, because he could play multiple positions on the defensive line, 6'4", 310 pounds, so he's flexible, has a size, has a length. Both of these players have market values in the $3 to $5 million range. So do you think that those are players that the Bills could go after, Kevin? And I should clear that up by saying one of those players, because I don't think that they will be signing both. But do you see them signing one player like this?
I think they already have Carter, right? You already have Ed Oliver. So, you're really looking for one tech development. I think you keep Jones for one more year. I think maybe you do something with his contract and then replace him next year. I'm going the rookie route, guys. I don't think there's any value in spending even 3 to 5 on one of those guys. Like, I thought last year might be the year they did that. But for me, it's a matter of get another rookie in here that's going to take over for 4 years. With that, if that is what the remaining pick is, that's got to go to defensive tackle at that stage. And you're going to probably sign a corner in free agency then. You don't know what corner is going to be available when you're picking in the second round. So you're going to go with that defensive tackle. I think there's a couple of great rookie options. So I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to punt on those veteran guys at this stage. If there's one cheaper, like you're talking about 2 or less, then, I'm all ears for anybody, in that 1.5 to 2 mil range. But those are going to probably want to stay out of the comp pick range, which is usually around 2.5. So if you're talking about a DT under that limit, I'm game. But as you get to 3, 4, 5, 6 with Myles Garrett, I'm talking about here, I'm out. I'm going defensive tackle in the second round. That's how I'm utilizing that's how I'm building the trenches, and probably taking another tackle later on in the day or the next day in day 3. So I'm punting on that situation with, combining it with your proposed Garrett trade as a punt. Without that trade, I think it opens the doors to a lot more options, whether, whatever you're thinking of the defensive tackle. But I'm going second round DT, and I'm probably not needing to see the assets. You already have assets into Oliver and Daquan and the third round pick into Carter. You can sign Jordan Phillips, or you can do like 1.5 or less people. That's where I would fare, because I want Carter and I want my second round pick playing a boatload with the 2 starters at this point. And there's been a couple guys that said they would be great fits next to Ed Oliver. So those are the guys that I'm focusing on.
Now, Pat, this is interesting because I agree with Kevin from the standpoint of use that second round pick on a defensive tackle, but I think that there's room for a 5th defensive tackle, and that's where you can sign either Butler or Sebastian Joseph Day, because as I mentioned last week, he could be a Dwan Smoot replacement with that inside-outside flexibility. So if you don't re-sign Smoot to be your edge defender, then you can just substitute him in, maybe consolidate, get 2 for 1 here, and get a Sebastian Joseph Day. And as much as I have been under the impression over the last few years where it's like, well, we have Ed Oliver, we have Dwayne Carter, I think we're good. This past season proved that we can't be satisfied. It's not good enough, and that's what Philadelphia said. Just when you thought that they were done, they just kept adding to the pipeline and adding. So I think that's why if you can get one of these guys for the right price, it is going to be worth it. And then, as Kevin said, you can further address it in the draft.
I definitely agree. The defensive line is one of the most important positions in football. Looking at it, the Bills have had interest in Sebastian Joseph Day in the past, and I do think that Brandon Beane will try to bring him in again. And like you said, Kevin, while drafting a defensive tackle in the second round.
Now, I want to go to corner here because this one is very interesting. Now, assuming that the Bills are making these moves that we're talking about here, they're obviously not going to have as much money to go get your Trevarius Ward or some of these top corners, maybe even a DJ Reed. So I mentioned Jonathan Jones before because of Mike Pellegrino connection, but I believe that you guys are big Asante Samuel Jr. fans, correct?
Yes. I am, yeah. Yeah, I think that the reason that the Bills could potentially pursue a boundary corner like him, he has great reaction skills, great coverage skills. He's good in multiple schemes. The only reason he's probably in a fairer price range, he had that shoulder injury. The Bills love player values off of injuries. That does not scare the Bills. They've taken Mitch Morse off concussion history from the Chiefs. They've spent many dollars on players who are coming off of injuries, and that's not major to me. That's not a knee. That's not an ankle. That's not a foot. Achilles. It's not even concussion in history. Talking about a shoulder, it sucks, but that's not something I'm going to be worried about long term. And in the meantime, you're probably going to get a fair reduction in price. And prior to that, he's one of the best cover corners in the league. He'd be every bit as much of an entrenched corner two as you could hope for with Christian Benford long term. And I think ultimately you wouldn't have to worry about corner any longer with the three of them and Taron Johnson. That's what's appealing to me. And I think the Bills could structure a contract to where it's not devastating. And it was a need. Like, ultimately, Christian Benford went out in the playoffs. We talk about the D-line all the time. We don't talk about, once again, how bad Kyer Elam was and how much of a problem the secondary was across the board in that game. And Douglas wasn't great himself. So, especially toward the end of his tenure here in Buffalo. So I think that the corner room is just as important, because ultimately the Bills had more teams getting the ball off in under 2.5 seconds. We complain about sacks all we want, but if teams like Tua and other players are getting the ball off in under 2.5 seconds, all Myles Garrett can do is create everyone hates it, but the pressure, because it's just not likely that you're going to get to the sack. The Bills do face the largest amount of quarterbacks hitting the ball off. They need secondary players that can cover. I think that's a valuable asset allocation to me, not continuing to stack, in my opinion, like a Butler, like a $5 or $6 million defensive tackle. I think you got to fill in, you got two premier pass rushers now with Rousseau and Myles Garrett. Like, you have Ed Oliver there. You have a second round rookie. You have Daquan Jones, who still can do some things. Like, I need that asset allocation to go to a gaping hole at corner too, because no Douglas. And I'm just not good on Dane Jackson, guys. Like, maybe how you feel on other positions. I can't do a Dane Jackson or similar. The Bills need a corner two for this scheme to work.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said. I'm just not sure if the Bills can make it work financially, just based on these cap hits that these players are going to be taking, especially if they have to get a new contract done with Myles Garrett. So, Pat, do you think that this is feasible? Because the more I think about it, the more it does make sense. Because if the Bills are trading that first and the second, they don't have that third, and that 1 second-round pick that they do have, we're saying that they're going to spend it on defensive tackle. Can we trust that a fourth-round rookie is going to be Christian Benford's new running mate? Or in my case, when I'm saying Jonathan Jones, sure, maybe you could balance each other out and say it's going to be a platoon between Jones and the rookie, and you still have DeMarcus Ingram. Is that going to be enough, or do you think that the Bills have to spend a little bit more in this scenario to get someone like Samuel?
Well, to Maseri's point about, looking back at the AFC Championship game, our secondary was not good as soon as Benford went out. Even Russell Douglas was not that good. So I think it is important to get a guy like Asante Samuel Jr. Like Kevin said earlier, he was playing at a very good level before he suffered that shoulder injury. So I think if you compare Christian Benford with Asante Samuel for the foreseeable future, that's a pretty good, scary duo.
Yeah, and we know how the Bills love going after players who are entering their second contracts. I mean, look what they did a couple off seasons ago with David Edwards and Taylor Rapp and players like that, where maybe they haven't played their best football yet, but you say, hey, come to Buffalo with our culture and with our coaching staff, and we're going to develop you, and then we're going to make this look like a bargain. And then in a few years, you can go get paid, and we're going to get you at a cost-controlled contract for the next few years. And maybe eventually they can afford to work something out. But I think that's in the Bills' DNA. They want to find players in that 25, 26, 27-year-old range and try to catch them at their peak. Now, that being said, as we flip over to the safety room, this one is very interesting to me because I think that the Bills do want to roll with the aforementioned Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop. Do we think that DeMar Hamlin gets re-signed? Because I think he does for the right price. And I'm going to throw a name out there that if they can't get Hamlin re-signed, let's just say he's too expensive and he signs elsewhere. What do we think about Marcus Epps, Josh Allen's former teammate? And I know that shouldn't be the only credential to get you on this team, but we talked about players coming off of injuries, Kevin. That's another player. I know his was a little bit more substantial, but maybe you can get him at a bargain. He's within that age range too. He's a little bit older than Asante Samuel, but I'm wondering if that could be one of those contracts where the Bills are going to look very smart in the end.
I'm not as off the injury now. He's going to be 29, almost 30. I think he's out of the range of guy you're talking about. Could he be a depth signing? Absolutely. I mean, no one's out of the running for be a depth signing. Like,
yeah, this is for safety 3, potentially right. Safety 2.
Yeah, like for me, ultimately, Bills are looking at 1.5 and less. I think there's some other names that the Bills could pursue. Safety's never really an over expensive position. You don't have to spend a ton of money, especially if you're looking at safety 3s and not like Javon Holland. So I think that ultimately the Bills can make the decision to probably hand pick a safety 3. So we'll see how that goes. But you got to start Cole, especially in the offseason we put together so far. You're probably going to have to start Cole Bishop, and you're going to have to start Taylor Rapp in this play. You don't have any draft picks left, really. You've taken a DT. You maybe sign a corner. You don't have a lot left here. So unfortunately, what may suffer is you may go with a Cam Lewis as safety 3. Like it just is what it is. I don't know. He knows the scheme. He plays special teams. He has showed up at times. You're going to probably do something like that, or maybe supplement him with a $1 to $1.5 million safety. But I'm probably looking for a step younger than Epps, coming off an injury, turning 30. Whatever it is at some point at the end of the year. So I'm probably leaning to see if there's a guy that you could get more like a Rapp. You got Rapp on his first contract. That's kind of where I'm looking. But safety 3, the Bills may not have all the cards to address safety 3 the way they'd like to, especially with the offseason you've put together so far. Safety 3 may take a hit, and you may have to roll Cam Lewis or rookie. I mean, I'm down with trying a rookie on day 3. Like that is where a safety 3 can be. Yeah, that's what DeMar Hamlin was. So that's where you can take a chance with a Cam Lewis and a day 3 safety. That's probably where I'm leaning at this stage because I've spent money on Samuel. If you get the other defensive tackle you're talking about and Garrett, I mean, you're probably pretty capped at that stage. And the problem here, guys, there isn't a receiver signed yet. So we're going to probably have to roll with the receiver room as is if the offseason goes like we've predicted so far.
Well, Pat, so a couple of other names that we talked about last week were Jeremy Chin, Xavier Woods. I'm going to throw another one out there, Julian Blackmon. Do those players make sense for you? Maybe from a football standpoint they do, but to Kevin's point, the way we kind of mapped out our offseason, will there be enough money, or do you think that they'll just have to resort to re-signing DeMar Hamlin as that safety 3 and then drafting one on day 3 as well?
Well, I think with DeMar Hamlin, he's going to get more than his projected value. I think Spot Track had him at $3.3 million. I think the team will give him more than that. And as far as safety goes, I'm kind of going to defer on this one and draft a rookie safety because, like you guys already said, we are going to be pretty close to the cap already with the way we have mapped out the offseason. And with Sean McDermott's, he's able to work good with safeties. We've seen that with Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Cole Bishop, and the way they have spoke about Cole Bishop as well tells me that they really want him to start alongside Taylor Rapp.
So just so we can kind of wrap this position up, no pun intended with Taylor Rapp, but I'm going to say it's either DeMar Hamlin or Marcus Epps. So what's a general consensus here? Is it going to be DeMar as safety 3, or is it going to be someone like a Marcus Epps, one of those free agents, maybe coming off an injury, you can get him for a cheaper price?
My consensus is a rookie. So I think it's rookie safety 3. I mean, that's like a quintessential when you're a team like the Bills. You're going to have to take a risk there. And my backup to that would be Cam Lewis. Like they will sign Cam Lewis. He will be like a special teamer, and he can play backup slot, and he's going to be your backup third safety, in my opinion, which is pretty versatile for the Bills and with his special teams capabilities. He's going to be the one, my opinion, battling with that rookie. But I don't think they have it either. I mean, Hamlin's going to make too much probably. Even if it's more than 3, it's too much. Whether it's 3.5, 4, it's too much. So he's out. So Epps would be more likely than Hamlin in this, unless Hamlin doesn't get paid. But my vote is still rookie and probably a player on the team like we've said, like Cam Lewis.
So you're saying Cam Lewis would be safety 4?
In this situation, yeah. When you drafted a rookie?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what he is, now, technically, right? You have 3 ahead of him this season, and he's got that versatility to play corner as well.
Okay, well, that being said, the last position here, and this is a big one too, wide receiver. So I'm just going to get this out of the way because I think we can all agree, re-sign Matt Collins, Ty Johnson, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So that being said, there's still room for one more wide receiver. Is that going to be a re-sign of Amari Cooper? Is it going to be a rookie? Or can it be someone who I think makes sense? I think Kevin's in agreement here, Hollywood Brown, because the other point of emphasis that Beane and McDermott made at the Combine, they want someone who has speed, but also has to be a football player. I think that was a little dig at Xavier Worthy, right? So if you're trying to find that speed element who can stretch the field vertically and horizontally, I know this free agent class maybe isn't the best in terms of finding that specific player. Like Deebo Samuel, I thought that would have been a very intriguing option because he's kind of like the poster child for Joe Brady's offense. So if I'm trying to find a similar comp, is Hollywood Brown the best the Bills can do, or do they want to just go to the draft and try to find that comparison?
You can hope for in the draft. I think that's really where, I mean, the problem here is like once again, see, the Myles Garrett trade does give you limitations because we've been trying to find positions for safety 3. We've been talking about other position corner. We've been talking about other things, and we have one pick, like really, and we've all already agreed that it's going to go to DT. So this is the issue with the trade. Receivers wide open. If the Bills don't make a Garrett trade, first round's in play for receiver. Second round's definitely in play for receiver. Free agents definitely in play for receiver. Christian Kirk, who's hanging out all the time with Josh Allen, who Josh has wanted, minus he got that huge deal, and the Bills were like, part of the reason Kirk might have gotten that huge deal with Jacksonville, where the Bills were willing to sign him, and other teams, and Jacksonville's like, nope, unlimited money. He's getting cut this offseason, and the Bills.
He just got cut, by the way.
Okay, great. So he's very, very available for the Bills, in my opinion. The only issue with Kirk isn't the player, isn't the fit, isn't how he's been a 4-4 guy. I love this style of play. He plays a lot of slot snaps. So as long as the Bills can, they have to worry about Curtis Samuel, and they have to worry about, obviously, their new paid slot receiver in Khalil Shakir. Can they make that scheme fit? I mean, we know Brady loves the slot receivers. He doesn't throw to his boundary receivers. We know that. So it possibly can, but that probably comes with a moving away from Curtis Samuel somehow. But Kirk is a perfect fit for Josh Allen. And if you don't think Josh Allen's in the office right now after that announcement, Pat, I think we're all crazy. The Bills will try to see if they can make that work. But the vet free agent market guys, especially if they trade all those assets for Garrett, that's where they're going to have to go. And they're going to have to try to find someone to play for a value. I think Hollywood Brown is a great fit. I think he'll take the same deal, let's say, with Kansas City. That's my biggest problem with Hollywood, is I've been told whatever the Bills will be willing to pay Hollywood, the Chiefs would be too, and I think he stays. So that's going to be the biggest deterrent for me in Hollywood, which I'd like. But Christian Kirk makes a lot of sense. He may be willing to play with Josh Allen on a good deal. But I think the Bills will have to go at the vet free agent market. I just don't think you can rely on a fifth or sixth round receiver to do anything for you. So he's going to be a vet free agent. And it's going to be getting one to take a deal that you just got. And maybe the trade market comes into play here, guys. A team that takes a lot of cap on, like Cooper. So, but Kirk makes a lot of sense to me with all the factors being played in. Someone along those lines, Hollywood does too. It's a huge free agency class at the receiver position, more being available than probably were initially anticipated. The Bills need to tap into this free agency receiver class because it's better than normal.
Now, Mr. I do have a question for you. Is a guy like Davante Adams possible if he's willing to take a little bit of a deal?
Yeah, Adams is absolutely I still think was their preferred player over Cooper last year, but Adams wanted to play with Aaron Rodgers and probably will again, though. So we talk about the problems with all these players. The problem with Kirk is he's a slot. The problem with Hollywood is he'll probably sign with the Chiefs. The problem with Davante is he going to follow Rodgers again? They can both handpick their destination together. I think he might. And also, the Bills just don't have any money, especially in the offseason we've drawn up. Once again, in a vacuum, if they don't do the offseason we've drawn up, Adams could make sense if they're like, we just need a boundary receiver. We're willing to give Adams a 2-year deal. That could line up. They, in my opinion, those trades don't happen hours apart for random reasons. Those trades happened hours apart because Adams, and he followed all the Bills players on Instagram and, was probably the second destination where he was going to go. And he was better than Cooper. I'm sorry. So the Bills are going to have to determine if they have the cap space for him. He fits definitely. The Bills are definitely in on trading for him. I don't know how, they traded a third. So we know that they were willing to pay a third. So we know, obviously, the Jets' third came to be a really high pick. What a dumb trade by the Jets, by the way. But ultimately, Pat, the player fits. Will he play here? Do we have the money? There's some limitations here. I ultimately do think he does follow Rodgers or goes to a team loaded with cap space, as that's probably the move that Adams does. But he does fit the team. And if the Bills do determine he is one of their top priorities, you don't sign that defensive tackle like Day we talked about. You don't sign maybe Asante Samuel Jr. The next thing you are in range to sign Davante Adams. So they can, but they're moving away from other offseason moves if they do go that route. But this receiver class, for sure, the Bills are going to play in it, whether it's Adams or Kirk or they go down a little bit in the order. But they're going to put Hollywood Brown. They're going to pick one of them.
I do have one more name for you guys real quick before we wrap this up. Tutu Atwell. I'm wondering if he could be that speedy field stretcher that the Bills are looking for. He only has a market value of $4 million. That could be a cheaper option if the Bills really build up their defense, as we've been talking about throughout this whole segment.
Tutu could fit. I know there's been some talks about him. He fits in that, like, is he, like, how much of a football player is he category that they already referenced? He is literally like what I think of when they're talking about that, even throw weirdly away for a minute. I'm thinking of Tutu Atwell when he makes a comment like that. He can run a 9. I worry about his fit. Like, ultimately, I think they tried that with Hardy, and they realized with Josh, you need a guy that does more than a 9. You need a rack guy. You need a guy that gets open quickly. You need a guy that I just think Kirk is more the fit. But the value's there. Like, he is a deep threat. The Bills could mess around and try him at $2 and $3 million. He's like 5'7", though. They tried it with Hardy. I think that's my reason they don't go with that route is they did. And we don't see that kind of offense from Joe Brady on top of it as the tiebreaker. But there are some talks where he could fit the 9 role that the Bills are looking for. How much can they pay for that? Dude, I think they can pay like $2 million for that role. Like, if that's where he ends up, the Bills could be in play at like 2.5. But that's probably about where I stop. And, that's a hard line for me.
All right, well, we will find everything out on Monday because that is when the legal tampering period starts, and then the new league year starts on Wednesday. So it is going to fire up pretty quickly here, and we will have a free agency special for you. We will be live Monday afternoon, not sure the time yet, but there's going to be a lot of news happening, so we want to come live to you and try to break it all as it happens and see if some of these moves can actually come to fruition that we've been talking about. Also, we will have a graphic coming out throughout the weekend as you can see some of these moves. I know we talked about a lot today, so we will put everything down on paper and make it a little bit more accessible for you guys. So for Kevin and Pat, thank you guys for watching the Going Deep Buffalo podcast on Built in Buffalo, and we will see you guys next week. Go Bills.